Now this is 7:30 GMT edition, starting about 6 minutes before that time on Friday, the 30th of June 2023. This is the Khoodeelaar television channel, broadcasting only on the internet, not on terrestrial, not on satellite, not on cable platforms. So this one is being broadcast on the day after the Court of Appeal in London declared in a majority ruling that the British government's plot, well, they didn't say plot, but I'm saying it plot, to deport asylum seekers that seek asylum in the United Kingdom, to deport them to Rwanda in Africa is illegal or unlawful. A two-page spread on the Times. Supreme Court could overturn Rwanda ruling within weeks. That's the boastful, confident, reassuring backing for the criminals behind the plot. And this woman, who is of Goan origin but was born in the United Kingdom and is allegedly a practicing Buddhist, Gautam Buddha would be shocked with her criminality. We call her Suela, Ibila, Cruella Fernandez. We don't use her Braverman artificiality, but she's been increasingly, as a photographer, as an image student of images, I can see that she has been heavily, how shall I say, made up to misrepresent her true image. Her clothing, the shoulder bag, and the accessories, posing with holding the papers, all of these are made up. This is the second incumbent in the office of the UK Home Office after the ugly Priti Patel, both of them from Indian origin backgrounds, both raised in England, and both being used as tools of crass evil racism that no white-skinned individual would be allowed to even attempt to put on the table. So these two are in post, have been in post power. Well, the previous 2017, in a speech that I made on the 4th of May 2017 at the spot in the Altabali Park, marking the anniversary of the racist murdering Altabali, that Stupid Jabid's complaint at that time in the news that, quote, leftists or left wingers in the United Kingdom were calling him Uncle Tom. And I said to him that they were not calling him Uncle Tom. They were just describing him as he was behaving. So if he didn't like being called Uncle Tom, stupid Jabid, I said, on the 4th of May 2017 at the Altavali Park in Whitechapel, London, E1. The simplest way that stupid Jabid could get rid of that kind of accusation, whoever making the accusation against him, was for him to stop being a Uncle Tom. Did he listen? Of course he didn't listen. Instead, it was only a matter of time before he aggravated his servitude, his mental slavery to the cause of the racists in power in the United Kingdom by removing the nationality by birth. The only nationality by birth that Shamima Begum had. And stupid Jabid did that in the same crass, corrupt, stupid way that Suela Ibila Cruella Fernandez has been posing. Because yesterday, for example, in an exchange with Stella Creasy, an East London Member of Parliament, Dr. Stella Creasy, as she prefers to be called, Suela Ibila Cruella stood up and said that she was not in the business, and I use her key phrase. She said she was not in the business of taking lectures from the Labour Party. Now, if this criminal were to be accepted as a having been called to the or given a career license as a lawyer, she should never have said whatever the Labour Party or Stella Creasy, as one of the Labour Party MPs was saying, was amounting to a lecture, because that was happening very soon after the announcement by the Court of Appeal of the ruling that the Rwanda plot was unlawful. So, if she were actually legally kind of knowledgeable, she would have referred to the legality and the legal aspects of the ruling. But she said she was not in the business of taking lectures from the Labour Party. I mean, Suela Ibila Cruella has got a picture in the Times, which must be a picture that the Times in picture is Suela Ibilar Cruella Fernandez is, of course, the second in the post of the UK Interior Minister, who has Indian origin, parents or parentage. Goa is, let's say, considered Indian. We're not going into the debate about the controversy around where Goa should belong after 1947. But this mental slave, Ibila Cruella, now on the pictures, there is this picture of Suela Ibila Cruella, and then next to that is a picture. The caption says it's 5 foot 6 inches tall Rishi Sunak, and that would make him very similar height to John Barco. And standing next to Daniel Kozinski, who is supposed to be the UK's tallest member of parliament, who's got the height described as 6 foot 9 inches. So standing with all of his 5 foot 6 inches, Rishi Sunk really looks sunk next to this 6 foot 9 inches tallest MP. And Quentin Letts, who is the political sketch writer in the Times, his piece is headed Judges Head for the Beach after sinking Braverman, he says. He doesn't say Fernandez. As I said, I'll be researching more into this picture because this picture is completely untrue. Now, going back to the actual contents of the ruling and looking at that under the kind of in the light of this or in the darkness of this heading, Supreme Court could overturn Rwanda ruling within weeks. Let's say that this edition of the Khoodeelaar television channel, world exclusive edition, being dedicated to analyzing, world exclusively analyzing the complete illegality and lack of legality, constitutionality, ethics, and morality that dominates the United Kingdom judiciary. And the fact that the Times could run this heading, Supreme Court could overturn Rwanda ruling within weeks, shows the stupidity on the part of the Times. Now, who are the people that are given the kind of byline? The joint byline is given to Matt Datan, Home Affairs Editor, and Jonathan Amis, Legal Editor. And Jonathan Amis, the legal editor, is as weak as his predecessor, Francis, whatever her second name was, who was in that post for a very long time. The Times never broke during the last, let's say, 30 years or even longer. The Times newspaper has never broken a single substantial legal story news wise, and it is not likely to break any stories soon. With this stupid heading, the Times is showing the dirty digger Rupert Murdoch's allegiance to the racist, corrupt Supreme Court role to be to persist, perpetually deliver racist, corrupt, rubber stamp rulings in favor of the United Kingdom government. And the reason why the Supreme Court is likely to do that is not based on the law, not based on constitutionality. It's based on the defiance of the law, the defiance of constitutionality. By that I mean that the United Kingdom, which has got, I'm not looking at the actual current data on the number of international treaties, declarations, and charters and conventions to which the United Kingdom as a state has been signatory. Because I don't have to give the data, the norm, the main culture in the United Kingdom in the judicial context is that of denying all the obligations that, according to the signatures, the United Kingdom would be under to uphold those the varieties of convention rights, declaration rights, treaty rights, and charter rights that the court system routinely denies citizens and individual people. Like, for example, the Supreme Court, the racist Supreme Court, behaved like a cheerleader for the racist Boris Johnson, who was imposed as Prime Minister when the Supreme Court loudly rejected Shamima Begum's appeal. Well, it wasn't Shamima Begum's appeal, it was the rights of Shamima Begum to be allowed to come to the United Kingdom to challenge stupid Javed Sharif's removing her British by birth nationality. It was an appeal against the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court by the government when Ebil Priti Patel was imposed as Home Secretary. Now, this picture of Suella Ibila Cruella must be investigated. It is too unreal, photoshopped and artificially presented, and the criminal must be shown in her true colors, literally. This is artificially colored and artificially designed. This picture at the center of this two-page spread, which is headed, the spread is headed Supreme Court could overturn Rwanda ruling within weeks. Now, going to the cartoon today in the Times, the cartoon by Peter Brooks, one of the more familiar cartoonists on the Times. he actually opposes the editorial line that is being represented in this two-page spread, saying that the Supreme Court could overturn Rwanda ruling within weeks because Peter Brook's cartoon shows Suella Ivila Cruella as an aeroplane riding on top of the judges, and the aeroplane is marked Rwanda. And Peter Brooks has caption to that Let's see where the cartoon appears. The caption to Peter Brooks' cartoon it says, "Dream on, Home Secretary." That is Peter Brooks saying. And Rwanda is the prominent word on the cartoon depicting Ivila Cruella as the aeroplane. And she is, in the cartoon, she is correctly represented. Now, let's see if this camera manages to capture this Peter Brooks cartoon. Just about, maybe, let's try. Where is the. Because of the instability of the screen, the image may not. But if we put it the other way, that is the nearest we can come to. So Ivila Cruella, and you can see on the bottom left side in the caption, "Dream on, Home Secretary." There's Peter Brooks' cartoon, and the Rwanda is written there. So, what she's doing, and what the Times is actually slavishly doing, is bowing up, boosting the confidence propaganda for the 5 foot 6 inches tall Rishi Sunk. The concept of sinking is, of course, repeated in Quentin Lert's heading. Judges head for the beach after sinking Braverman. And the analysis written by the Times, well, the legal editor, let's say, is not naming who wrote that analysis. But the analysis is, of course, the editorial policy of the Times, which, according to the Private Eye magazine, is edited by Tony Gallagher, who is described as a Conservative Party fan. So Tony Gallagher editorially is festering in denial of the reality. So let's have a look at the analysis, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, and it appears to be written by Matt Dayton, the Home Affairs editor. Suella Braverman's dream of sending migrants on a one way flight to Rwanda has been dealt a blow, but not a fatal one. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Because he knows that Tony Gallagher agrees with whatever he's saying. And the Supreme Court, as the rubber stamp, will, of course, set aside the Court of Appeal ruling of yesterday. That is the assumption. And the use of the word skirmish is also ignorant. It says the Court of Appeal's ruling is the latest skirmish in a long running battle between the Home Office and opponents of the scheme. It is only a narrow defeat, and the details of the verdict give plenty of room for ministers to launch a winnable appeal at the Supreme Court. Now, one thing that I have to point out to those who are not necessarily familiar with the English bureaucracy of judiciary is that the appeal, any appeal from a trial court, has to be, well, that is the theory anyway, entirely based on the law. If the decision being appealed was legally erroneous or flawed, then the ruling that is being appealed, or the appeal against the ruling, that is, whatever the ruling is, will be rejected by the Supreme Court or the higher court. That is the bureaucracy. The, the actual truth is that policy. The policy is what actually goes through the minds of the judges who tokenistically sit as the bench of the Supreme Court in a given hearing. That's what happens. But this one is also misleading because the actual ruling was published yesterday, but the hearing was not held yesterday. It was held weeks previously. But they are saying that the Supreme Court could overturn this Court of Appeal decision within weeks. They are misrepresenting the actual time scale, unless, of course, they know something that they are not sharing with the readers. Now, the assertion that they make is that there is enough in the ruling to make ministers confident that they will win the appeal against the Court of Appeal in the Supreme Court. The real contents of the ruling that I have read and I have found completely dishonest. The ruling contains the opposition, that is the judge called Barnett. Now, Barnett is the one that actually said, well, there were three judges there. One was Voss, the other one was Underhill, and the third one, Barnett. And Barnett is the one that actually said that assurances given by the government of Rwanda were sufficient to ensure that there is no real risk that asylum seekers relocated under the Rwanda policy will be wrongly returned to countries where they face persecution or other inhumane treatment. And this refers to the editorial in the Times today on page 27, the editorial headed, "A plan B is needed to save policy on migrants." That heading is itself in contravention and an intentional contravention of the many obligations, constitutional law obligations, that the United Kingdom is under, according to the four categories of international treaties, declarations, conventions, and charters that the United Kingdom is signatory to. Now, for those who don't necessarily have access to this, let's see the current estimate as to the number of treaties that the United Kingdom is signatory to. Okay, it says on the UK government website under the heading treaties for which the UK is, well, UK treaty. The UKTO contains details of around 15,000 treaties. So just imagine, involving the United Kingdom, multilateral agreements where the UK is a signatory. And there is this explanatory note. International treaties and obligations. This web page explains international law and practice on heritage. These are many international documents known by a variety of names. The most commonly used terms are conventions, recommendations, and charters. Now, what I am saying is that of the 15,000 that are currently available or exist, there should be references to at least 10, but there is no reference really. There is no reference to any of the treaties really in the Court of Appeal ruling, nor in the Supreme Court rulings, say, against Shamima Begum, to take a contextual example. The only international law treaty kind of obligation that was extensively, substantially discussed in a Supreme Court ruling was the one on the 17th of January 2017. And the 17th of January 2017 ruling by the Supreme Court, let's say, all right, this case was called Belhaj and others against Jack Straw and others. And the summary introduction to this particular entry is: the Supreme Court found unanimously in favor of the claimants and dismissed the government's appeal. It ruled that the doctrine of sovereign immunity did not apply because the foreign governments were not parties to the cases and their legal interests were not affected by the claims put forward. And let's go into that Belhaj a bit more detail. Now, this Belhaj case was about torture, but the fact that it was only heard in, in 2017 shows that the judiciary is a joke, even when it rejected the government side, because it is nearly 20 years after the brutalities and tortures sanctioned by the criminal Jack Straw, who was the cabinet minister at the time, who was really the one that gave authorization for the United Kingdom, on behalf of the United Kingdom, for American Secret Service people to hijack, to kidnap, and torture Belhaj and others from a country in Southeast Asia. So, what I'm saying is that the United Kingdom judiciary, even when considering its kind of opposition to the government ruling, is a joke, is dishonest, because the 2017 ruling in the Belhaj case happened 7 years after the end of the Labour government regime. So it wasn't a ruling against the government. It's typical dishonesty and corruption. It was a tokenistic display that the court can be relied on to pass a ruling against the government. It wasn't passing a ruling against the government. It was tempting the innocent observer to believe that it was, but it wasn't. And there are other various aspects. So, what I'm saying is that the Times today, which is running a misleading picture of the evil, Suella Evila Cruella, and is running a misleading, false representation of the role of the courts. How could it say the Supreme Court could overturn the ruling of the Court of Appeal unless it knew that it would, which is what will happen? If the Supreme Court overturns the Court of Appeal, where does the actual challenge then be referred to? It is going to be an international forum. where almost certainly the Rwanda policy would be again condemned and rejected. But there is no indication in the Times coverage or in the Times editorial today of any of that. And the Times editorial doesn't recognize the existence. It says Plan B. It doesn't refer to the 15,000 kind of treaties, signatures, etc. The heading in the Times editorial called Plan B reads Rishi Sunak is right to contest the Court of Appeal's ruling on Rwanda, but he, that is Sunak, needs a Plan B in place if his entire policy on illegal immigration is not to fall apart. Now, this is a completely dishonest, criminal, corrupt statement. Because the plan about Rwanda is not about illegal immigration. The taking away from that, if we look at the actual shortage of people working in the United Kingdom, the shortage has been described as being connected with the imposition of restrictions on non UK workers coming to the UK, resulting directly from Brexit. But the Brexiteers have denied that, saying that that is not the case, including this very stupid governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, who is morally, intellectually very unreliable and very ignorant. But he is playing to the gallery of the government of the day. He is not telling the truth based on the because his predecessor, the Canadian Carney, has publicly stated not long ago that Brexit messed up the United Kingdom economy in a way that it was inevitable would happen. So Bailey has been now put effectively by Sunak regime to put this pretentious lie which effectively denies what Carney had said. The other thing is that the collapse of Thames water, the collapse of Thames water is connected with the contamination of water that the millions of people in London and in the affected areas affected by Thames water are being forced to drink. I mean, where do you go for comparison? It is absolutely sick making water, contaminated water that the millions of Londoners, 8, 9 million people, 10 million, 12 million, 13, 14 million, whatever the actual reach of the water, the Thames, these people are being made to drink this sick making water. And Ofwat, which is supposed to be the regulatory body to regulate the water organizations, is behaving just like a stooge. What Andrew Bailey is doing about Brexit, Ofwat is doing about Thames water. Because of the collapse of the business of Thames water, which has got 15 million subscribers, it is about to be declared bankrupt. Ofwat is saying, like Andrew Bailey saying about Brexit, that Thames water will not be nationalized. Now, this is something that is so stupid that requires a serious essay length analysis, which we shall be doing in another series. But going back to France, we didn't start on France at the beginning, but we are continuing on the situation in France. The French police murdering this boy, 17-year-old boy, has resulted in millions of people across France demonstrating, agitating against the police murdering the 17-year-old boy. Nahel, is it Nahel? And his mum, who has been demonstrating, said that not long before he was murdered, her son gave her a big kiss and said, "Mom, I love you." And she told him she loves him and told him to take care. Next thing she was told was that they murdered him. Well, she didn't say the word murder, at least not in the translated version that I'm reading from. But we are saying that he was murdered. Not just us. Millions of people across France demonstrating are saying that the policeman murdered this boy. Now, the significance of that is here. Looking at the actual, because that item is also on 2 pages. The item on France is on pages 28 and 29. So I've got page 29. I'm going to look for the missing page 28 because of the logistics, there is no table that I can put the computer on. So it's literally on the lap and it slips off. That's why I'm having to look for the page that must have slipped off. Okay, so I found this. So here is the kind of two-page spread about this boy's name is Nahel, and he was murdered on the 27th, which was the Tuesday that his mom recalled his last conversation with her. Now, compared to the French demonstration, justice for Nahel, justice for Nahel, there is nothing in the United Kingdom that has happened in a long time in this way about anything. The police have murdered and carried out so many crimes, even the murder, the kidnap, the rape, the murder, and the actual other unspeakable things done to Sarah Aberard by a policeman did not get followed by any democratic demonstration that could be compared with the French response to the policeman murdering the 17-year-old boy Nahel on the 27th of June. So the heading to this two-page spread, police flood French streets as fury spreads. And there is a big picture of a man demonstrating, carrying a torch, burning flame, and a multiracial mixture of the demonstrators, African, Asian, and all of these are saying justice for Nahel. There's a masses of people demonstrating in a remote aerial photograph, and there is the burning cars or vehicles. So, what is happening in France is never can be expected to have happen in the United Kingdom. This is how brainwashed people are because demonstrating for justice has become criminalized significantly by voluntary kind of manipulation and brainwashing. The weeks of protests across France not long ago about Macron's pension plan have been in any way comparably resisted in the case of the United Kingdom. And the fact that Matt Hancock, the criminal who was in post as the Secretary of State at the expense of health during the COVID 19, the confession by this criminal that hundreds of thousands of people were murdered, he said he was sorry about that. I mean, these murders have not been followed by any demonstration at all, even by the allegedly outraged, bereaved friends, relatives, and children of the victims. So I mean, even during the 1960s, let's say, the demonstrations that took place in France against the North Atlantic Treaty Organization supporting the Americans' assault on Vietnam, the events against the American assault and massacre of Vietnamese was not matched in London by what was happening, comparing the events in France that were absolutely remarkable and justifiably so. So you can take examples from the last 100 years, 200 years. There is nothing. There is nothing about democracy, nothing about freedom, and nothing about really campaigning for justice and human rights in the United Kingdom. So if you look at the descriptions attributed to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was the main commentator used by the West against the Iron Curtain in the last decades before the collapse of the USSR, you'd find a curtain of darkness, surrounding the whole of the USSR. And if you look at the Czechoslovakia Spring and the other Alexander Dubček, who was sacked in the 1960s for daring to stage a particular dissent. I mean, he was reduced to farm worker, factory worker by the USSR for fascists. That happened under the fascists of the USSR controlling the Iron Curtain countries. But in England, there is no Iron Curtain officially. But the little Englanders behave as if there is an Iron Curtain. So, what you see is the stupid and untruthful and embarrassing, internationally embarrassing stupidity of expressing sorrow. Hundreds of thousands of people were murdered in the so called care homes and other facilities, so called. And Matt Hancock, the criminal, appears before the so called committee of inquiry and says he's sorry. That's it. You could not imagine that in France. You could not imagine and should not imagine that kind of subservient timidity being the extreme expression of outrage. How can that be an outrage at all? Now, there is a piece in the papers. Well, I'm looking at the Times one, which says police spy unit has left a legacy of hurt. Can you believe that? There is no outrage. It's hurt. I mean, check that against the rush, the haste with which the stupid Javid took away Shamima Begum's British by birth citizenship. And Shamima Begum has not been found in any published report or account to have committed a crime that can be prosecuted, a crime that she can be objectively correctly indicted for. Yet, by dismissing all the Treaty of Lisbon, ignoring all the UK's international law obligations, the UK's Pakistan origin, Pakistan descended Home Secretary, stupid Javid, took away this teenage child's British by birth citizenship. And the Supreme Court rubber stamped that. Whereas the police spy unit has done severe damage to many women's lives and many activists' lives. And nobody has been held to account, really. So this is white people being betrayed and let down. No, nothing happens. Sarah Everard is white as it could come. She was kidnapped, she was raped, she was murdered, and most likely she was tortured as well. And the police get away. And there is this piece about the claim by a source who knew the name of the criminal suspected of kidnapping this child in Portugal. Madeleine McCann. This person, according to the reports today, contacted the London Metropolitan Police with the exact name of that suspect 9 years ago. And what did the police do? The Metropolitan Police. They ignored him. 9 years ago, they ignored him. And they didn't bother. Now, in the Madeleine McCann kind of campaign by her parents, 9 years has been a too long a period. Because so many events, so many leads, and so many various kind of controversies, including the allegations and counter allegations between them and this Portuguese police, etc. These have been quite a regular occurrence in the news coverage. And there is no evidence that the Fleet Street media has actually noticed the possibility, even the possibility that some source might have quietly, that is in secret, contacted the London Metropolitan Police with substantial information about this child being abducted. And the police didn't even bother. So, despite the fact that Louise Casey has done the review of the Metropolitan Police, and the review actually covers everything, including racism, which is an extraordinarily rare event. Louise Casey herself is a racist, but she is doing a propaganda thing for herself by kind of recruiting, incorporating some black skinned relations and dressing that up as her, that is Louise Casey, the racist, solidarity with those black skinned bereaved people. That is the motive. But despite that motive, Louis Casey's report or review, which has been formally published by the London Metropolitan Police, does cover all the topics: racism, sexism, and all the rest of it. And any serious observer or student of democracy or the decline of democracy or the remnant of democracy that is there, but it's being suppressed drastically by the fascists of Indian origin who have been systematically put in place as the Home Secretary to disguise the fascist onslaught on basic civil rights. There is no outrage. There is no demonstration in the remotely comparable way that has been happening in the last 3 days. What? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Well, last 3 days, because it has been 3 full days after the murder of the 17-year-old boy Nahel by the policeman. And according to all the reports that have been published by the French media, this boy was not involved in the drug gangs, not involved in crimes or whatever. As a teenager in the suburb that he lived in, he had issues, but he was an active child trying to get out of these by trying to enroll on various courses that would help him. And the police murdered him. The boy was absolutely innocent, and the police shot him dead at point blank range. Just the way that happened in 2011 to a black young person in Tottenham, in Haringey. The police murdered him. Nothing happened. Now, if you compare this kind of dramatic decline of what used to be democracy, basic democratic kind of dissent and protests that have been happening in the last, well, let's say in the 2 decades since Tony Blair, the fascist murderer, was apparently elected as the leader of the Labour Party in May 1997. 15 years before that, or just about 15 years before that, 20 years before that, there were protests in Bristol that later spread to Brixton, and then later in the summer of 1981 spread to many of the big English cities, including Liverpool, Merseyside, Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, of course, London, but not in the east end of London. And in the east end of London, a mental slave from Bangladesh, who was appointed by the establishment of races, was boasting in 1981 that in Tower Hamlets we have no riots. Fuck him, the fucking slave. What was happening across the main cities in 1981 was not a criminal act. People were demonstrating for civil liberties. And this fucker, this shit slave, Bangladeshi slave, boasted. As a reward, these type of slaves, mental slaves, are given spots in agencies that are patronized and matronized by the state. And these are put forward as diversity displays. Extrapolate that, and you can look at Sajid Job as a diversity display, Suela Ibila Cruella Fernandez, a diversity display, Ugly Priti Patel, a diversity display, and so on. And the Rishi Sank. Rishi Sank, we said yesterday, was not known to have done anything or done enough wrongs, bad things for him to be described by us as depraved. But after his response, reacting to the ruling, however temporary the ruling may last, however short lived the impact of that ruling may be, we have changed now. And we think that Rishi Sunak is depraved. And he will soon be earning the description of evilness personified. We shall be talking more about all of those. And I'm not even going to read the plan B in the stupid, ignorant, crassly ignorant, stupid, idiotic, fucking racist Times about the control of the immigration, because what they're doing, the Times is leading the charge as a so called non tabloid responsible outlets, is that they're continuing the racist agenda, because the crisis in the UK economy is read. If you visit any of the organizations that employ large numbers of people, let's say, if you go to a shop, supermarket, if you go to a hospital, even not in London only, but in the so-called countryside, you will find on their feet people who are working are mainly African and Asian people. The white ones, you can't tell whether they're from any of the European countries, but African and Asian people, you can tell whether they are born in this country or not, doesn't matter. So there is a crisis that shows that the population in England, which is the dominant demography within the United Kingdom, the England economy, the UK economy is going down. And one of the most visible evidence, indices, index of that decline and going down, is the reality that white skinned individuals are reluctant to do work that they consider reserved for people of African and Asian backgrounds. Look at the racism. It is these people that the cunts in the Times are decrying. If the Asian and African people are taken out of the equation, then the UK economy would literally come to a halt. Now you go across the Atlantic and go to the USA and North America, and the American economy is being kept going by so many people exploited and paid pathetic sums in wages coming from the other countries, Mexico and other parts of the continent. And the same applies to Australia. Despite the fact that the Australian fascists are constantly harassing people of Asian backgrounds mainly, the economy is being kept going by what they offensively called immigrants. I mean, for a continent sized country which was imposed on the original nations by criminals being imposed there from UK or England, for them to decry and insultingly call people of African and Asian backgrounds immigrants is the ultimate outrage. So we shall be talking about all of those in due course, and we shall be adding our commentary on all the aspects of the issues and topics that we have not necessarily talked about because of the time. This is now 1 hour and 15 minutes, I think. We shall end this particular edition at 08:41 GMT on Friday, the 30th of June 2023.